As the day begins, across the streets of Colonial Williamsburg, before the crowds arrive, before the voices of interpreters and visitors, before the world of the 18th century is brought back into being, there is only stillness. And in that stillness stands a house that stood here for centuries, not grand in the manner of a palace, not imposing like a fortress, but something else entirely. Once home to a signer of the Declaration of Independence, still standing from the nation's founding era. I often find myself here, drawn into the many stories that seem to revolve around this place. And yet, it feels like a new beginning this time. The first of many new discoveries I plan to continue to uncover around the city and from other historic locations. But to begin this new series of quests, I set my sights on the mysteries of this home's evolution. How it was built, how it changed, its resume of past residents, and how it survived centuries of history. The George Wythe House has stood here longer than the nation that surrounds it. It stood before the United States was imagined. It stood when Williamsburg was the capital of an empire's colony. It stood through years of decline and alteration, and yet it survived. But its survival was never guaranteed, as it passed through periods of change and neglect where its future was uncertain. This is the story of how the house evolved and how it was brought back to the way it stood when George Wythe himself lived here.
So when you think about many of the historic homes found all throughout Colonial Williamsburg, you immediately begin to wonder which ones are truly original, which ones are restorations. And of course, there's 89 original structures found all throughout the acreage that makes up the area. But with each place you come to and the more times you visit them, you can really begin to uncover more about the history and all of the archaeological finds and discoveries they made at each site. And the place that we're going to go to today and do some deeper exploration than usual is a well-known place that we've been to on quite a few occasions over the years for past stories we've told. And that place is the George Wythe House. And it's just chock full of history that even on numerous trips here, it seems like there's always something new to learn. So we're walking down Nicholson Street, passing by other original colonial homes found here. As we get closer to the Palace Green, way out there in the distance, I can finally see the front doorway of George Wythe's house. So I'm gonna begin the day by exploring the exterior of the house in detail, highlighting, based on the research I've done, some of its architectural features and history from its 18th century construction through its later restoration. And then I'll go inside the house room by room to thoroughly investigate any original features as well as interesting history that I might be able to uncover. Sitting along the prestigious Palace Green nearby the Governor's Palace is the George Wythe House, one of the more well-known residences in all of Colonial Williamsburg.
In the early 1750s, Williamsburg remained the center of Virginia's colonial government, and the land behind Bruton Parish Church was among the most important in the city. Living here meant being close to power and plenty of influence.
Just steps from the palace, a prominent colonial Virginian once planned a home here that would later pass into Wythe's hands.
The lot was owned by Richard Taliaferro, a wealthy planner, colonial architect, and builder, whose last name was thought to have been commonly pronounced in colonial Virginia as Taliaferro. Somewhere around the middle of the 1750s, he built the brick house that still stands here today. Not long after, the story of the house shifted through family connection. Taliaferro's daughter, Elizabeth, married George Wythe, and through that marriage, the property passed into Wythe's hands. And when you explore here today, looking closely at the brickwork, it's not hard to picture how it all came together. Each brick carefully set in place, with no way of knowing that the work would still endure centuries later.
Exact brick. I'm always mesmerized when I see that, and I just stop and ponder about it for a minute. It just holds a whole lot of mystery, and if the brick could talk, there's no telling the stories it would be able to deliver.
What began as a private home built in the style of its time became tied to one of the most important figures in early American history. But before uncovering the layers of details regarding the initial construction period of the house, it helps to briefly note the later changes that would ultimately shape how it was eventually restored. Although the house still remained in relatively solid condition overall by the turn of the 20th century, over the course of the previous century, it had undergone a number of alterations. It was eventually purchased and partially restored for use as a parish house for Bruton Parish Church, during which time Dr. W.A.R. Goodwin oversaw early renovations to the building between 1926 and 1927 that would later be refined as even more evidence came to light. In 1938, Colonial Williamsburg acquired the property and soon after carried out a full restoration to return it to its original appearance.
And the restoration wasn't just guesswork. They used old maps, historic records, photographs, anything they could get their hands on to determine how the building originally looked. And one of the things I find very interesting is they recorded everything in such great detail, all the elements of the house that were original, as well as things that have been updated far after George Wythe's time living at the home. But all these records were recorded and documented. Photographs were taken before and after, and it really is a neat time capsule that they have that shows at the early stages of the restoration before it actually happened, all the way through its completion. And before restoring anything, they carefully studied the entire building itself before making any further corrections to the earlier work or any additional restorations. And like I said, they recorded what was original and what had changed and what needed to be removed or repaired to make the building appear as it did when George Wythe lived here.
When thinking about the initial construction of the George Wythe House, it begins with the ground itself. Before the walls, before the rooms, the earth here was cut open. Trenches were dug down into the soil, deep enough to carry the structure and to form the lower level that still exists beneath the house today. They were filled, layer by layer, with clay fired in 18th century kilns, hardened into brick, and set in place with oyster shell lime mortar. No concrete, no steel, just a structure rising out of the ground it was set into. What formed here wasn't just a base, it was the beginning of the entire house, above and below. And somehow, through centuries of weight, weather, and time, it held. The house you see in Williamsburg still stands on that same beginning. The house contains a substantial below-ground level, historically referred to as the cellar and classified in modern property records as a basement. The entry down there is marked by a bulkhead. Rebuilt in 1937 at its original location based on photographs and excavation that confirmed how it once stood. an area inaccessible during tours of the house today. But the cellar vaguely reveals itself from the outside, through small low-set windows in the brickwork, sitting just above ground level. Easy to pass by until you realize you're looking into the hidden world nestled below the house.
Taking notice of these, it does make you wonder what's down there.
The closer you get to the home, the more they start to show themselves. In the 1927 work, these areas were carefully taken apart and rebuilt, with original frames and surrounding masonry removed, patched, and reworked where the structure had shifted over time. Now covered in cobwebs clinging to the frames and weathered along the edges of the openings, the original iron grills and fittings were removed during later work, then measured, redesigned, and replaced in restoration, leaving traces of how these cellar openings functioned in the 18th century. Some preserved, some reconstructed, and set back in place as they once might have been. Below ground level, the exterior basement walls were cleaned and repaired with salvaged brick from other features of the house, then quietly reinforced to stabilize the original structure without changing what's visible above. As the walls rose during construction of the home, the masons laid each brick in a style known as Flemish bond, alternating the short and long faces of the bricks, a method that required skill, patience, and precision. Every brick placed by hand, one after another. And standing here today, it's hard not to feel something in it, knowing these are the same walls that have been here for more than 270 years. The same brick, the same surface, still standing after all this time.
It's quite a simple observation, but you've probably heard me say this many times, but when I just stand here and I'm looking at this brick, it's just very strange to know that that exact same positioning, that exact same brick was there when George Wythe used to walk in this front door. And probably one of the most remarkable things you'll notice quickly when visiting the George Wythe House, and frequently reported in its land reports, was that the wall surface here was largely original, except for areas that needed repair or had been patched in earlier work.
Small repairs made over time, blending into the original wall rather than replacing it, and oftentimes replaced with original brick from another feature of the house.
Now, the front of the house has seen quite a bit of repairs over time, from changes to the porch that affected the original brickwork, with patching around and above the front door where the porch once was, and these sections were actually repatched using new brick matched to the original brick that was also used from elsewhere on the house.
A quiet reminder that what you're seeing isn't a replica of history. It's history, shaped through repair and preservation. With major changes to the house, like the evolving front porch, which over time was altered, reduced, and physically cut into the original brickwork before being carefully restored to its earlier appearance, can still evoke a sense of curiosity if you look closely.
When you're looking at this front porch, archaeological reports say the remains of the first porch were still visible in the foundations of the building. And what this meant was that they could actually trace exactly where the original steps and platforms had been. The steps were originally brick, with the first porch made entirely of brick treads and risers that rose from three sides up to a landing at the front door level. And when they studied the remaining mortar, they actually found impressions of the original wooden step nosings still preserved. And even the wood texture survived in the evidence, because some of the impressions still showed the wood grain from the original step edges. And that means the shape and surface detail of the old steps had left marks in the masonry. So here I am sitting on the front porch of the Wythe House, and this would be the oak nosings and the brick mentioned in the land report. And it seems that the reconstruction followed the documented historic building practices of long ago. Practices that were known to exist in other 18th century houses. Now, one interesting thing to consider here is the front entrance door itself, based on the land report, is said to be original but heavily patched. With it being original, it shows that it had been repaired many times over the years, with missing or damaged sections being replaced and blended into the original wood. You can definitely see the texture in there, revealing its age. But it does mention that a lot of that patchwork would have happened where there's hardware placed in the door. A lot of the components of this door system are original, but some of the surrounding areas of the door frame, the jamb, and the door sill, I believe, are partially replaced with new heart yellow pine being used to match the original materials. And if you look at that strip of windows above the door, that's known as a transom window. And that section of the door is known to be original, and it only needed minor repair and reglazing during the restoration. And the roof that you see up there was not always what it is today. When the restoration began, the roof was actually covered in slate shingles, but eventually they found out that slate was not the original material from the early building period. The original roof was actually made of wood, and it was the old insurance records that actually showed that the roof of the George Wythe House indeed did actually have an old wooden shingle roof.
During restoration, fragments of the original split cypress shingles were discovered in the attic. Reproductions based on those early shingles were used on the roof and the cellar bulkhead and can be seen today. The original roof boards had badly deteriorated over time and were replaced with modern yellow pine boarding, forming the base beneath the rebuilt shingled roof.
During the restoration, they built a 4-ply asphalt roof system under the shingles, and this included layers of asphalt felt and asphalt coatings to create a waterproof base.
The roof is anchored by 2 large brick-end chimneys, part of the house's original design. During the major restoration in 1927, the chimneys were found to be in poor structural condition.
They had long cracks running almost all the way up the outside, and the cracks caused the chimneys to lean and bulge, making them look uneven and distorted. And they eventually filled the cracks with gray mortar, but this made them stand out in comparison with the other bricks of the house. It became quite an eyesore, so eventually they changed the bricks and corrected the color so it matched and was cohesive with the rest of the location.
The upper sections were rebuilt above the second floor fireplaces using new handmade brick made to match the original work. Brick from the original chimneys was not discarded. It was reused in repairs elsewhere on the house, including patching sections of the exterior walls. What remains of the chimneys today is a blend of original material and careful reconstruction, still shaping the silhouette of the house after all this time. Looking across the house, the records show the windows vary from side to side, some with more original material than others, and a mix of repair, replacement, and restoration still visible in the details. The second floor windows in the southwest room of the house seem to have the largest cluster of original elements, with various documents noting that its original frames and sashes remained with only minor repairs required. But across the house, I found myself wondering if any of the glass present today could actually be from the 18th century. It's less about finding one clear answer and more about figuring out what still remains and how each architectural detail discovered in my research fits into what the house reveals today. It's something I'm determined to keep uncovering as my exploration of the Wythe House continues, room by room.
So it's interesting to note that in the reports, something you might not first notice when you visit the Wythe House is that the house has no exterior shutters. And the reports looked at local Williamsburg data, and it revealed that brick houses often didn't have shutters like other 18th century towns would have. So even though shutters were a common sight in other colonies, at the Wythe House, they weren't.
Even the attic, mostly hidden from view, is part of its original 18th century timber framing system. Heavy, hand-hewn beams form the structure of the roof, the kind of traditional construction used throughout Colonial Williamsburg and found in other 18th century homes. These frames were assembled using joinery methods like mortise and tenon, blocking the timber together without relying on modern structural hardware. With evidence of this still being spotted inside the attic through recent imagery posted online that reveals an area of Wythe's old house that many don't typically get to see. In other images of the attic framing, you can see a central support system that resembles what builders often refer to as a king post style truss. A simple but powerful triangular structure used to keep roof loads in balance. And even though most visitors never see it directly, this hidden timber skeleton is what has carried the house through nearly 3 centuries of change. Along the top edge of the house runs a wooden cornice, a decorative line that finishes the roof. What you see today has been repaired over time. In the 1927 restoration, it was found that parts of it had already been replaced in the 19th century, but much of it still reflected the original 18th century style. Rather than remove it, restorers patched and preserved what was there.
So even though it wasn't the original cornice, they decided to keep it because it very much kept its historic character.
It's one of those details you almost miss when you look up, but once you notice it, you realize it wraps around the house and blends almost seamlessly into the architecture. Also in 1927, the house was fitted with something it had never originally had: iron and copper gutters neatly lining the roof. But they were a modern addition, not part of the 18th century design, and were removed to return the house to the way it was first built. Because here, water was never meant to be carried away above your head. Instead, it follows a quieter path, falling from the roof, slipping down to the ground, and disappearing into a brick gutter that runs along the base of the house, just beside the basement wall. This drainage system was reintroduced during restoration based on archaeological evidence of earlier surface drains that once carried roof water away from this corner of the house toward the street. At ground level, that idea is still expressed in a shallow, gently curved channel that guides water away from the foundation, a modern reconstruction of how the house was once made to manage the rain. Nothing about it draws attention. It just works, quietly doing the job it was designed to do, long after the gutters above were gone. When the George Wythe House was finally completed, it stood as an example of Georgian architecture. a dominant 18th century style in Britain and the American colonies, known for its emphasis on balance and symmetry. Think of it like this. If you drew a line straight down the middle of the house, both sides would almost mirror each other. That's the idea behind it. A centered doorway, matching windows on either side, and at each end, tall brick chimneys anchoring the shape of the house. This kind of order shows up, not just here in Williamsburg, but in some of the most prominent buildings across colonial America. But exploring the house up close, it stops feeling perfect. Instead, you notice the small variations in the brickwork, the marks of every hand that set each piece, long before mass production ever existed. Every time I stop and really look at the original brick, I feel a connection to those first builders who could never have imagined that centuries later, people would still be marveling at their work. Stepping inside George Wythe's old house feels like you're following the footsteps of everyone who lived here, long before my much-anticipated return visit. If you think about March 29th, 1940, the day the house was first informally opened to the public, I can't help but wonder what it felt like for those first visitors to walk inside and see the rooms, carefully brought back to life. The moment you walk through the front door, the hallway commands attention. Semi-narrow and oddly welcoming, the hallway sits near the heart of the house. Similar to my time exploring the Wythe House, I imagine those first visitors moving through it, their eyes scanning every detail, taking in the rooms, and maybe asking themselves the same question I do now. If these walls could talk, what stories would they tell? After George Wythe left Williamsburg to live in Richmond, the house passed through the Taliaferro estate and was briefly owned by James Madison, then Bishop of Virginia and President of the College of William and Mary, and cousin of James Madison Jr., the future U.S. President. He held it for roughly a year before it was sold to a Reverend John Dunbar. After his passing, his widow remarried Colonel Henry Skipwith, and they continued to live here until her death in 1819, when the property passed to her daughter, Elizabeth Izard, though a Mrs. Margaret Page is recorded as its occupant. For me, with each visit here over the years, it's always the same feeling, a sense of hope that I might uncover something new about George Wythe's years living here, but also shed light on the others who once owned it. When it comes to furnishings inside the entrance hallway, as well as the entire home, the records here are fairly limited. So much of what's in the house is interpreted from inventories of people in similar standing and social circles, along with what little documentation survives for the property itself. The walls are covered with patterned wallpaper, a reproduction influenced by colonial designs, popular in the 18th century. It isn't original, but every detail reflects careful historical research. Under the hallway carpets, I'm quite sure the original floorboards would be smooth in some places, and probably uneven in others, having consistently recorded footsteps for centuries now, including my own. Following that earlier image of Elizabeth Izard taking ownership of the home, additional names appear in the records as well. By the late 1830s, Henry Toland is recorded in connection with the house through a transfer from James Izard of Philadelphia, though his interest in it remains unclear. In this exact hall, George Wythe would have welcomed young students he taught and guided in the study of law, including Thomas Jefferson, Littleton Tazewell, and William Munford. The space itself seemed to shape their learning within a quiet environment where curiosity was encouraged and knowledge demanded.
At last, my dear Coulter, I am again in Williamsburg, the old and well-beloved scene of my studies. Through the surprising friendship and generosity of Mr. Wythe, I live in his house and board at his table, at the same time enjoying the benefit of his instructions without paying a farthing. In this happy situation, tomorrow I begin the study of law. You cannot perfectly comprehend the divine virtues of Mr. Wythe without living in his house. His heart is a receptacle of all that heaven can bestow. I know not how I shall ever make a return for the infinite obligations I lay under to him.
With each visit inside the house, I find myself trying to better understand how it was all put together, what's been here from the beginning and what's been restored. Aside from one reproduction, all the doors leading off the hallway into each room on the first floor are original. Rooms that I intended to take a closer look at, one by one. The original staircase in the house rises gracefully from the hallway, with a railing supported by a balustrade, a Georgian-style composition of slender, turned balusters supporting the handrail. You can clearly see the unique craftsmanship of these original balusters. At each landing, the big upright post at the starter turns of the staircase, called newel posts, upon closer inspection, seem to show subtle hand-carved marks. Reminders that skilled artisans shaped each piece of the staircase by hand. Restoration work confirms these newel posts date back to the house's earliest years in the 1750s. Another fascinating realization. Even the staircase steps themselves were thoughtfully proportioned. The riser, the vertical face of each step, and the tread, the flat surface where your foot lands, were arranged with both function and elegance in mind. As you ascend, your eye travels along the smooth curve of the railing, and the geometry of the woodwork insists on its place in the architectural harmony of the home. This stairway was not just a means of moving from one floor to another. It was part of the lived experience of George Wythe's students. One of them, the son of St. George Tucker, whose father lived across the way along Nicholson and Palace Green. Nathaniel Beverly Tucker, whose obelisk tombstone can still be easily viewed inside the cemetery at Bruton Parish Church, later recalled how Wythe once rushed him up these very stairs to share an unexpected finding.
He surprised me by patting me on the head and then putting his long, bony fingers into my hand, leading me up into his chamber and showing me a swarm of bees at work in a hive which he had fitted against one of the panes of his window.
It's a moment that reveals two sides of Wythe simultaneously: the careful scholar and teacher of law, and the thoughtful, natural philosopher who delighted in the workings of nature itself, choosing to share the delight of his discovery with his young pupil. Entering the parlor is like stepping into a carefully composed portrait, re-envisioned in the 20th century, but grounded in the original elements that once defined the room. In Goodwin's notes, a line item entry under Home Updates identifies the parlor's original woodwork is wainscoting, a common interior feature of wood paneling along lower wall surfaces, a term he appears to have used somewhat broadly here to describe the room's formal window aprons and heavy chair rails that still bring warmth and structure to the space today. The upper walls are covered in a deep fuchsia flock wallpaper with a bold floral pattern, a design chosen to reflect the look of expensive 18th century silk. Regional studies of period finishes helped curators select this specific color and texture, revealing just how rich and vibrant a room of this stature was intended to be. During restoration, traces of a rounded corner cupboard were discovered and used as the basis for its recreation.
And look at this. These are the sort of items that were probably kept here long ago.
This piece now stands where the original once did, offering an impression of a space that would have held some of Lady Wythe's most valued possessions, it seems.
And she would have definitely had plenty of cups and trinkets, perfect for serving tea.
And beneath my feet, never not utterly fascinating as many times as I think and mention it, are the original floors George Wythe once walked upon.
And the area inside here is mostly covered now in what I believe portrays the bold geometric medallion and stylized floral patterns characteristic of Uşak carpets from Western Anatolia, which is modern-day Turkey.
This type of Turkey carpet is documented in an 18th century purchase ledger, which records that Wythe acquired one from the estate of Governor Francis Fakir in 1768.
But beneath this rug are the same floors Washington, Rochambeau, and other well-known colonial figures once walked over.
Some old archive footage I filmed nearly 7 years ago during a visit to the George Wythe House shows the parlor floors in their bare form before the carpet was placed in the room. Other residents who would have enjoyed this room included a Professor John Millington and his wife, Sarah Ann Millington, who made the Wythe House their home, living here by 1839 and taking ownership by 1841. Manuscripts from 1844 recall Millington entertaining children at the house, crawling on the floor during gatherings and growling like a bear, as described in the account. A quick visualization of this early 19th century scene, which may have actually taken place inside this very room. Millington, a mathematician and engineer, published Elements of Civil Engineering in 1839, one of the first American textbooks in the field, showing that this house was both a family home and continued to be a hub of learning, even long after George Wythe taught aspiring law students here. Passing through the original doorway into what is interpreted as Lady Wythe's chamber, this room may have functioned as both a private room and an office space. Much of the interior framework was replaced or restored during later work, including floor framing and floorboards. Those small surviving elements of original architecture were recorded at the time of restoration. Baseboards, chair rails, and cornices inside the room were largely reconstructed based on surviving examples from other parts of the house, with fragments of original baseboard found around the window aprons. Two of the room's windows cataloged during restoration as window G and H both retain a significant amount of original interior trim. Window G, a complete unaltered window, was used as a reference for restoring other first-floor windows in the house. The original sash and interior shutters that remain reveal how the room was designed to respond to light and air. I imagined Mrs. Wythe inside here, opening them, letting daylight in, and allowing a breeze to move through her chamber. At some point in the early 19th century, porch was added to the northwest corner of this room, as an early 20th century photo shows intact. Taken not too long after 1926, when the property was acquired by the Marshall Foundation for parish use associated with Bruton Parish Church. It was later that same year when the George Wythe House was acquired by the Colonial Dames of America and presented for continued use by the church before coming under the broader preservation and restoration efforts of Colonial Williamsburg, which would later assume responsibility for its interpretation and care within the historic area. In a photograph of Goodwin and Rockefeller Jr. taken during the early restoration years, which I've seen many times, it's only recently I realized it offers a glimpse of the additional room added at the rear side of the house. Consistent with what I've read about changes made during its 1920s usage by the parish, and later removed in the 1939 to 1940 restoration. Quietly placing the image in the building's in-between years before returning it to its 18th century form. Back inside, records identified a closet in the southeast corner of the room and notes that an earlier occupant removed it and converted the opening into a doorway, which leads to what is listed in past diagrams as room number 8, now the dining room. Moving through here, what was once simply a storage alcove has become a passage between rooms. Now, with the next room fully filling my field of view, as it always seems to, it felt strangely both welcoming and slightly eerie. The original floorboards, like those in other parts of the home, would likely reveal patterns of wear under close inspection, perhaps hinting at where furniture once stood and how it moved during meals.
And it does mention in the architectural reports that the baseboards were completely redone during the restoration. The floors are almost completely original except for the minor patchwork they had to do in some areas.
While reviewing historic land and restoration reports, I came across evidence of the corner cupboard in the dining room, similar to the one in the parlor. Remnants of the original 18th century cupboard survive in a stud partition, a simple framed wall that was added after the cupboard was removed during restoration. The framing reused parts of the cupboard itself, still bearing traces of its original paint and revealing its original shape. This concealed piece would have more than likely offered the restoration team a clue to the room's original color palette. The frames around many of the doors and windows, known as architraves, are largely original. From where I stood in the room, I attempted to spot any sign of their craftsmanship left behind, distant evidence of the hands that once shaped them. All around the room, early 18th century design was evident in a mix of original and later work.
And it does say that these chair rails were newly installed during the restoration, so these aren't original, but were probably close replicas of what was here in the 18th century.
Interestingly, damage to the dining room's main door, reportedly caused by a gunshot, was never repaired and remains visible today.
And here is that gunshot. And there's no telling the story behind this, but the hole is still there after centuries of time.
With no clear evidence of when this took place, whether during George Wythe's years at the house, or perhaps much later in the years that followed 1866, when the property passed to Mary King Sherwell and remained in private hands for decades.
But it was never repaired. It can be seen clearly in the 21st century.
Now, the door hardware is a reproduction, but the hinges on the door are indeed the originals, as well as the exact door George Wythe would have opened and closed during the 18th century. As I think about all of the ownership transitions of the house, it's fairly easy for the mind to drift when you're this close to all of the stories it holds. During my daytime exploration, I found myself imagining the room by candlelight at night, plates being set, conversation unfolding, and the soft clink of tableware over an evening meal. Records from 1772 suggest that George Wythe may have entered a period of more careful spending. A purchase ledger shows that an order for new glassware and china, items that would have graced the dining room table, were abruptly canceled, though the reason remains unknown. George Wythe's office still stands today, precise and methodical, almost as if waiting for him to walk through the door again. The original door in this room still hangs on its original hinges, with original jamb, trim, and soffit panels, with locks being reproductions that closely match the era. You can nearly see it play out, this very door swinging open, with George himself stepping back into the room alongside other colonial figures who would have passed through here in the course of daily affairs.
It's not too hard to imagine Wythe in here, meeting with his friends, local politicians in town.
And there's no telling the conversations they had in here related to politics, but also philosophy, religion, and probably anything else that crossed their mind. Like much of the house, the floors inside the room are largely original.
The very floors that Wythe, his family, and everyone in the house would have walked over during the 18th century.
The first restored fireplace in Wythe's office was built from components of the original structure that remained in place. When later repairs were removed, its shape could still be traced in the brickwork, and the hearth was rebuilt from those surviving lines, returning it to its original position in the room. A kind of reconnection to the past that I found myself amazed by as I thought about it. Moving through the room, I further sought out features that were here when Wythe occupied it. I learned the window sash, architraves, and paneled aprons below the window seats are original, with only a few surrounding sections carefully reconstructed.
And you can see that easily. You enter this room, a well-lit room, which would have definitely brought in enough light if the interior shutters were open. And it does remind you that there was no exterior shutters on the Wythe house, but there indeed was interior shutters.
The original closet in the northeast corner of the room survived the test of time, with shelves reconstructed from what was originally in place. Gazing into it, I saw books, candlesticks, and a long rifle among the everyday objects that George Wythe himself may have filled the space with. Reaching the top of the staircase, the second floor hall opens up with a different kind of presence, less defined by what's in it and more by what remains. Beneath the carpet, the floor is still largely original, more than likely smoothed from wear over time. The same wallpaper seen in the hall below carries up here as well, tying the two levels together. Pausing at the end of the hall, I found myself looking outside, thinking about how the window opposite me at the front of the house, now restored to the upper stairwell, was once the doorway to the second-story porch that was added in the early 19th century, as noted in insurance records and early photographs, before later restoration returned the house to its earlier appearance. At the top of the stairs, the first room you encounter begins to feel familiar in certain details, echoing features seen in other parts of the house. It's even been suggested that students of George Wythe may have stayed here during the course of their studies, in what is sometimes referred to as the student guest chamber. The floor is still partly original, worn and repaired in places, particularly toward the north end, where it was altered when a stair was once constructed in the room below in the early 19th century. Some of the beams in this area were also replaced at that time. The fireplace opening here follows a similar pattern seen elsewhere, largely reconstructed, but shaped from what remained of the original fireplace edges, helping define its form again in the room. At the windows, the original frames and shutters remain, along with their architraves, while some seats and surrounding panels have been repaired or replaced in keeping with the original design. Passing by the original door and frame into room 13, much of the flooring here, along with the underlying beams, remains original. Many of the window elements are as well, including the full sash of the east window and the upper sash of the north window, while other parts have been carefully restored. And here inside what's often referred to as the upstairs guest chamber, the room stands out with its green organic wallpaper. It's got a large canopy bed, with this area being used by overnight visitors to the house. The mantel here is a reconstruction based on evidence left in the walls after earlier layers were removed. Notably, a small surviving section of the original wood base near the fireplace helped guide its design throughout the second floor. And that approach, working back from what survives in the structure itself, shows up repeatedly in the documentation across the house. There are two closets in the room, with the larger one in the southwest corner remaining mostly original, apart from restored shelves and interior trim. In an earlier Quest Capsule story titled A Crime of Greed, The Murder of George Wythe, I had pictured Lydia Broadnax, one of Wythe's servants, in a space like this, just going about her day, doing the daily work that kept this room in order and ready for use. Since then, I've always thought of this as the Lydia room, even if that doesn't match the historical record. Passing the original door in the second floor room, identified as the Wythe's master bedchamber, a part of the house that retains fragments of its original structure. The floors are especially fascinating here when you think about the high potential of George Wythe's footsteps moving across these very boards beneath you before he ventured out for the day. But I could look at these floors a million times and every single time be fascinated, just thinking that Wythe and so many walked over the very floorboards that we're walking over during a visit to his house here in the 21st century. Again, seen in this room, the window frames, architraves, and shutters are recorded as original, with some repairs. Other elements, such as the window seats, panels, and aprons, are close reproductions skillfully executed by the restoration team to match the originals in detail and proportion. This may also be the location of the notable beehive window mentioned by one of Wythe's students. If it is not a window inside here, it would only narrow it to a couple of rooms upstairs where it could be. The 4-inch chair rail that wraps around the room, interrupted only by the closets, fireplace, and windows, is a reproduction. My research revealed that it was recreated using an original piece found in the closet in this room, which had once been a simple board on the wall with wooden pegs for hanging clothes. The fireplace and mantel are also reconstructions based on evidence left in the masonry after later alterations were removed. The room contains 2 original closets, including a larger one that was altered when a wall was opened into the room behind it and later returned to its earlier configuration. The smaller closet door is original, while the larger closet door and frame were reproduced to mirror the room's entrance door. One finding I was thrilled to finally realize was that this room once served as Dr. W.A.R. Goodwin's office during the early revival of Colonial Williamsburg. The man, widely regarded as the father of its restoration. Despite its name, an 18th century lumber room was not a place for construction materials. The term referred to a storage room of sorts for items not used on a daily basis. Things like trunks, boxes, papers, and household equipment. Room 15, diagrammed on the southwest side of the house, feels more open-ended than the others. Almost like what remains is clearer than the story it once held. The original framework is still here, floors, beams, and window frames, but much of what you see has been rebuilt from traces left behind in the building itself. There's no surviving description of how this room was actually used, which makes it less about certainty and more about interpretation. Today, interpretive pieces help fill that gap, a few of which I recalled from my last visit here, including scientific instruments.
So this would be an invention from the 18th century.
Copies of historic letters.
This is a letter he actually wrote to his factor in London saying that I want you to use some of my tobacco money to buy one of these devices right here.
And foundational documents like a copy of the Declaration of Independence. With each visit over the years, I've continued to hear new perspectives, and at times, possibilities from the past I had never encountered before.
But look at his signature. Look at it carefully. And then look at how his name is written here. Look at the secretarial hand that writes this engrossed copy. Signatures are very individual. Usually we have a flourish under the name. We want to enclose the signature so somebody doesn't write something under your name that binds you to some kind of contract you were not aware of. He never says he doesn't sign it, but in the case of the Constitution, there are examples where people are not there when it's ready to sign and say, have it signed for me, put my name on it. Did he ask that? We don't have proof of that.
Still pondering the theory that George Wythe may have used a ghost signer to affix his signature to the Declaration of Independence. Even a copy of the Declaration here, along with other historic relics in the lumber room, may not have originally belonged to the space itself, but they help suggest the world he moved within, shaped by learning, correspondence, and scientific curiosity in the late 18th century. It's a way of stepping into the kind of environment he may have moved through, even if the exact contents of this area will never be fully known. After moving throughout the Wythe House, room by room, what lingers is less a single clear picture and more a layering of time. Original fragments still holding in place, shaped and reshaped through repair, restoration, and interpretation by those who lived here long after Wythe did. Stepping out into the garden area, the house becomes the backdrop of its rear yard. The grounds around the Wythe House were arranged as a fully functioning 18th century household, with the main residence supported by a network of outbuildings and work areas that handled the demands of everyday operations. Archaeological evidence points to a kitchen in the southeastern corner of the lot, identified through foundations, a large chimney, and nearby traces of a well, and what is believed to have been a dairy. Visitors today can peer inside the reconstructed kitchen to get a closer sense of how that space would have worked. Along the edge of the property, the laundry is also open to walk through, inviting you to move through the reconstructed space and picture the work that would have taken place here, alongside the enslaved people recorded in historical records, which at various points numbered around a dozen to nearly 20 individuals or more. Just beyond that, I also took a quick look inside the area, interpreted as the servants' quarters, reflecting on the lives of the enslaved people who lived and labored here within the broader working landscape of the property. And further back on the lot, the stable likely reflects what was once part of the original property, consistent with what would have been expected on a site of this kind in the 18th century.
And here's the Virginia Road wagon. This is an original freight wagon built circa 1810 for the Minnick family of New Market, Virginia. And it was used to haul freight between New Market and Baltimore until 1856. Placed in storage from 1882 until 1939. It was used in the Virginia exhibition at the 1939 New York World's Fair, and then was donated to the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation in 1959.
As I left this familiar site in Colonial Williamsburg, I carried with me a broader understanding of what the George Wythe House represents. Not only in its earliest form, but in the shifting perspectives and ongoing reinterpretations that continue to shape how it's understood today. Having walked through the rooms and the landscape surrounding it, it's easier now to see how the house carries the imprint of a founding father, as well as those who followed. My quest had finally come to a close, but the journey would continue on to the next historic location I would explore, where another part of history will begin to slowly take focus.